Welcome to Wine for Normal People, the podcast for people who like wine, but not the snobbery that goes with it. I'm your host, Elizabeth Schneider, author of the Wine for Normal People book and certified wine dork.
And I'm MC Ice, just a wine-loving normal person.
I don't think it's a secret that I love Campania in Italy. And to discuss one of my all-time favorite regions in Italy and really around the world, and certainly one that never gets the credit it deserves, I am so honored to have Antonio Capaldo. He is the chairman of Feudi di San Gregorio in Campania. Antonio is amazingly accomplished. He's a businessman. He holds a master's in management and economics from the London School of Economics, a PhD in economics and finance from a joint program between LSE and the University of Rome. He worked at McKinsey and he was a partner, and then he got into wine. It is an incredibly impressive background. We will talk about your family and how your family was involved with wine, but how did you wind up with all these degrees and what motivated you to go do a PhD? What were you thinking about as you were getting all of this amazing education?
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Elizabeth, for having me with you. That's a complicated question. There are many things you don't think about. You just do it because you feel it's right at the moment. So I come from a family where there have always been two interests. One is economics and more recently wine. More recently because investing in wine in 1986 was something that was done mostly to invest back in the home territory of my family after a earthquake devastated the area in 1980. So we are not people coming from generations of winemaking. No? So the other background is economics. So I started working. I started taking a degree in economics, and then I continued doing this. And I was curious. I wanted to consider the big change in my life. When I went to do this PhD, I wanted to work in the World Bank. And then I ended up a few years afterwards getting drunk almost every night. So it's quite a big change, but I'm happy about that. And probably even for the World Bank, it was better. You know? So at the end of the day, I got back where I belonged. That's how I feel it. And of course, I brought. It was useful for me because most of small companies, from generation to generation, sometimes there is little change. There is also little managerial vision because people grow up in the estate and they do exactly what their mother and father used to do. So I think it was useful for me to have an external perspective on what we were doing. It helped me to do my own mistakes, and which I did, and it helped me also to do, I hope, some right things. So, as you said, the background is quite diversified, but at the end of the day, now it's been 11 years, I'm in full-time in Feudi, and I think it was useful to have it. But the most interesting part of my life has been growing up with the wine in our culture and our daily habit.
What made you come back into the winery, though? You had this amazing business career, let's face it. Very few people make partner at McKinsey. Consider
that it's interesting. I was very young. I was 32, so which was a big accomplishment, no?
Huge.
And I think there was something I liked. I enjoyed about saying bye-bye the day I was elected, which is what I did. So there was something. There was something funny about that, but to be serious, I decided to go back in wine probably one or 2 years before, and I started taking even my sommelier classes to prepare a little bit more. But then I decided I really wanted it was more the idea of the challenge to make it partner, to try to finish that path. And so I pushed about a bit to become it. What made me come back, to be honest, it's a family story, So, and it's also a personal story. So on one hand, after so many years in consultancy, you want to try to do something with your own hands, and verifying that some of your advice was that you gave to other company was actually right. And most was also wrong, which is something you understand once you start doing real things. So on one hand, there was this willingness to do something with my own hands, and it was the opportunity because I was very lucky to have this in the family. Wine is not really the dullest of business. It's one of the most interesting, challenging. It's tied with nature, with art. So I was very lucky, to be honest. And then on the other hand, there was a family, because the last person of the family, which was my uncle, was working in Feudi until 2006. And for a few years, we had no person from the family running the company. And this was an issue because actually family business, although we tried to structure it, we tried to get it more managerial, you need a person from the family to manage a family business. That's why they call it family business. And so we had these 3 years where there was like an element of distance between the company and the territory and its own vision and soul. So I thought it was the right time in 2009, both from my personal perspective, but also from the winery, that a person from the family come back. 2009 was also a year, as you remember, a year of crisis, financial crisis. So it was a challenging time for export. So this was, I decided to come back. And my father was actually against that because, as you said, he thought I could follow bigger opportunities, but I'm sure he was happy about it. And everybody is happy since then. So I think it was the right move.
Really, the area of Campania in terms of export and power, it rests on 3 brands. I mean, that is the really interesting thing about Campania. There's Mastro Berardino, there's Terradoro, and then there's you. And these are the 3 pillars of Campania. And I can understand why you felt the pull to come back, because those other businesses are also family businesses, and Italy is all about the family business. And I would think that it would be something that you would want to have more control over. But can you talk about the history of Campania? Because it's a very long history in terms of, I'm not talking about detailed history, but in terms of wine, and really concentrating on what has happened in the last 40 or 50 years. The earthquake changed everything there. And then also, although they are competitors, I'm sure you also know them, the Mastro Berardino family, Antonio, shaping Campania's reputation and then paving the way for everybody else, and then you guys taking the torch.
Yes, so I understand you don't want the history from the Roman time, which I appreciate, because otherwise it would be a little bit longer. But to be honest, first of all, it's important to say we have indigenous varietals since really ancient times. Now, so when we talk about Fiano, Greco, and Aglianico, and in other, this is Irpinia, so the Avellino province in the center of Campania. But then if you talk about Falanghina, which is in an area close by, these are all varietals that have been brought here either in the Roman time or by the Greek. So we have a big history of viticulture. But then what's interesting is, let's jump from 2 millennia ago to the beginning of the 20th century. At the beginning of the 20th century, Irpinia was one of the most productive areas for grape production, not wine production, grapes. We used to send grapes with dedicated railways up to the north. There was a railway bringing grapes, red grapes mostly, Aglianico grapes, from Irpinia, from Campania to Piedmont and even to France, because it was the time of Phylloxera. Phylloxera destroyed vineyards in the northern area of Europe and in the northern area of Italy, and they replanted vines, but the vines were not strong enough. The wine was not intense enough. And so they used our grapes to cut their own grapes juice. So it's an interesting story, because at the beginning of the 20th century, Irpinia was like the star. So why it's not the star anymore? It's our mistake as producers, because what happened is that we could have produced our own wine, but we prefer to be traders of grapes. And then the Phylloxera came in the 20s, a little bit later, because all volcanic soils, in particular volcanic sandy soil, the Phylloxera couldn't really move from vineyard to vineyard. But then, of course, it learned, and it became a little bit more aggressive, like viruses do, and insects do, and parasites do. And so at some point we found ourselves without the market, because the vines in Bordeaux, in Tuscany, and in Piedmont, they were now well grown up.
They came back, after Phylloxera.
And Phylloxera came in our region. So we had a period of time from the 20s to as you said, Mastro Berardino is an example, not to the 70s, that was quite obscure. Mastro Berardino was starting making wine at the end of the 20s, so it was the exception. And then he was making wine until the 70s or the 80s. And in this time, the production decreased. The area with vineyards that decreased by 2/3 compared to the beginning of the 20th century. And when Feudi started in 86, we were number 6 to bottle wines of the region. And now there are 160 producers. So consider that from 86 to today, we had an incredible growth of the region. And that's, for me, it's positive. It's incredibly positive, because on one hand, we have now producers that are established, like ourselves, like Mastro Verdino, like Terradora. There are new producers that maybe produce only one appellation or produce appellation from a specific terroir, but they produce great wines. And the interaction between us and them make us grow our knowledge and understanding really of the potential of the area. So it's a moment where there is a community of producers that is really quality up in all the three. I mentioned the three DOCG appellations, which are Greco di Tufo, Fiano di Avellino, and the red one, Taurasi. If you will start from the 80s, so after the earthquake of 1980, there's been an almost continuous growth, which is not growth in volume, it's really growth in quality. And I believe that we have the opportunity today, what we miss to really become one of the core regions of Italy, not for quality, but for perception of the end consumer. What we miss is that, first of all, our appellations are small, so we don't have big volumes, which is not negative per se. But the second thing we need is to communicate a little bit better the intrinsic characteristics of our wines. And the fact that in our region is one of the, probably is the only one in Italy that has both white and red DOCG and great varietals. And it's an area that has incredible soil variety and that enjoys incredible acidity because it's a fake south. So it has the structure of southern wine, but it also has the acidity, the freshness, the drinkability of northern wine.
In terms of a part of the marketing story, which I think does not get out, and this is just my opinion, is
Correct.
There is this whole viticultural history. And right now, it seems like everyone is so obsessed with Etna because of the volcanic soil. And yet we don't see that carrying over, although you have that. You have the same exact thing. It's just a different volcano. And there's also this viticultural history. And I know you have been working on some of that too, right? Uncovering some of the viticultural history of the area. Can you talk about that too?
Yes. So first of all, there is a very nice picture on our website where you see Aglianico vines that are over 200 years old. And we have many of those, and we do a wine out of those, which is a Serpico. So we have incredible, real, tangible things that explain why our viticulture is so historical. And we can use these clones to reproduce in new vineyards. So the area is not made out of 10 clones, like even the old Bordeaux is made. Mm-hmm. We are so many indigenous clones that we can replant, select. So it's an incredible story in terms of viticulture. That's true. But why it doesn't come out? I believe that Etna there is one difference. We are split in many appellations. I think that's a challenge. So the reality is that Etna Rosso, which is basically Etna Rosso because Etna Bianco is a little bit less well known, but it's
well,
Etna.
I don't know. It's growing here a lot. So that's why, I'm a Campania lover. I love Etna also, but I'm finding it so surprising that Fiano and even some of the wines around Vesuvio are not getting the kinds of, and Greco are not getting the kinds of boost from this whole volcanic thing. When you read the articles about Volcanic, they sometimes mention the wines of Campania, but certainly not enough because they have that same quality, it's just different grapes, that minerality, the pumice note that you find in Etna. But it's so odd. I don't know if it's because Sicilians they're very markety. They like to get out there and push.
But I think Elizabeth, I believe really the appellation works because there is a knowledge of the varietals that we grow that is quite limited. Mm-hmm. And it's also very limited on the Caricante, on Nerello Mascalese, but they speak about Etna. It's a place, everybody knows it's a big volcano. And so I think it helps to locate the place. It helps that everybody doing an Etna Rosso. So in Campania, there are like 15 different appellations. And in particular, I mean, in Sicily, there are even more probably. But the good thing about Etna per se, I think it's simple.
Yeah,
I don't think simplicity is the key. At the end of the day, I believe that our own story has to be more complicated because we have even more diversification and potential. Because we have different varietals. We have an history that says, because it's the history, it's not the law, the Greco grapes are planted in an area and the Fiano grapes are planted in another area. They are close by, but no one plants Fiano in the Greco area and vice versa. And this was done by farmers way before the appellations came. So we need to talk about subzones. We need to talk about the different UCGs and the varietals, but it's a longer way to go.
Well, let's do it. Let's do it. I want you to, can you tell us about the geography of the region and the things that are here? I mean, the mountainous areas, the fact that everything seems to be planted on slopes. You don't have a lot of valley floor fruit, right?
No. Actually, if you consider Campania as the whole region, so the region of Naples, Amalfi Coast, and Capri, you have some wines that are grown by the coast. It's not where we are, but it's charming. The Amalfi Coast with the terraces, with vineyards. There is vineyards also in Ischia. It's beautiful, also the coastal part.
Yeah, but that's tourist wine, isn't it, really?
To be honest, it's tourist, but there are some very good examples of quality as well. Now, to be honest,
it's sort of like the Cinque Terre. It's beautiful there. It's nice to enjoy the wines there, but...
You know, Marisa Cuomo is doing a very interesting wine on the Amalfi Coast. But in general, you're right. I mean, it's more... it's wines that are... When you talk about tourist wines, I think it's not just a negative thing. It's just that because there is so much incoming, they tend to do the wines there. They sell there. They don't really compare themselves with all the rest of the world. So, they can be called tourist wines. I agree with you. And then in the central area, there are mountains. And there are two provinces. One is Avellino, which is the province where our winery is located. And the other one is Benevento. Benevento is the area of Falanghina. It's a white varietal. Falanghina is a DOC. Falanghina is an aromatic varietal and growing on a mixture of volcanic and chalky soils. It's a less... we're going to talk about the varietals of Irpinia later. It's a little bit less structured than Fiano and Greco.
I always think of it as it's a little less sophisticated. It tends to be kind of floral and easygoing, but it doesn't have the depth and the staying power of Greco and Fiano, right?
Correct. But as an aperitif wine, it's incredibly sophisticated on the contrary. So it's a wine that at the same time, if you compare it with other northern and very famous white wines, definitely it has structure. Mostly when it grows on volcanic soils, mostly when it grows above 500 meters. It's a wine that is not just an aromatic wine all in the nose. No, the nose and the mouth are quite consistent. But then you move from Benevento to Avellino, which is the province where we are, and there are three DOCGs. The first one is Fiano, which is your favorite, as far as I understand. Fiano is Fiano di Avellino. Avellino is the name of the town. Fiano is the name of the grape. So Fiano di Avellino is the name of the appellation. It's a 600, approximately 500 hectares appellation, so relatively small. And it's 100% white wine and 100% Fiano. So in this area, you just do Fiano. And the Fiano, basically, there are people who do it. It's very limited, the oak aging in the area, and so almost no one does it. It's a varietal that expresses its best without too much intervention of the man, because it's a varietal that has freshness, structure, aromaticity, and capability to age. And at the same time, it has some very peculiar notes, like the hazelnut note, both in the nose and the mouth, or the white peach. There are some elements that really make this varietal stand out in that region, because you can find Fiano in Sicily or in Puglia. It's not the same.
No, it's not.
So it's really a well-defined, clear appellation. Then close to that, you have the other one that is like the man and the female. Some people say man and female. So the Greco is the man, Fiano is the female. And I always say they don't know my wife, which is the other way around. So it depends on the man and the female. But definitely Greco is a more masculine varietal, stronger, darker. It grows on incredible soils because they are chalky soil, but close to sulfurous mines. So it's full of minerals. So it's not mineral by volcanic soil. It's minerality by presence of minerals under the soil level.
I didn't realize that. It can be very austere sometimes, like harsh.
Correct. Yeah, it's a wine that it's a little bit crazy because usually in white wines, the nose, it's very powerful, pleasant, and invites you to drink. In Greco is the other. The nose, in particular, when you release the wine, if you release it before 1 year after the harvest, so relatively young, the nose is relatively closed, and then the mouth, it's like it's a little bit like a red wine, no? Because It's very structured. It has inertial tannins, so at the end, the aftertaste is similar to a light red wine. It has an incredible, honestly, structure and aftertaste and length in the mouth. And Greco is where, the people from the region, they drink more Fiano than Greco, like you. But Greco, for me,
See, I told you, you have to let me move there. I'll be your biggest advocate.
If some things happen, you can move here. Greco, it's more, you have either incredible expression of Greco or not particularly remarkable Greco. So Fiano is always very good. If you drink 10 Fianos of 10 producers of the area, they are all quite surprising in terms of quality, positively. Greco is where the different subzones really make a difference. But if you are in the right places with your vineyards, it stands out amongst all the white varietals because it's totally different.
It's true. But so what is the winning combination? Because my problems with Greco in the past have been, it's exactly what you're talking about. So Fiano is fairly consistent. You do sometimes get watered down versions, but less so. If you get it from Avellino, it's not going to be, it will be pretty consistent. The problem with Greco is it is a little bit bipolar. So sometimes it can be so unbelievable and one of the best wines that you'll ever put in your mouth. And other times it's very harsh. It doesn't have the length. What is the distinction in the vineyard that would make that happen? Why is that? I've always wondered this, and now I think you have the answer for me.
No, I have the answer. It's mostly the location. The location of the vineyards. If I consider that Greco is made of 8 towns, the area of Greco.
Okay.
It's more. And there are 4 towns. To make it very simple, from Santa Paulina is for me one of the most interesting towns. Basically, if you go from 550 meters up, then it becomes pretty interesting.
Okay.
And the vineyards that are in these 4 towns that are, let's say, at a higher altitude, they are very interesting. And then the soil, if there are very, very interesting articles about Greco that luckily they did it because I would never be, so brave and so crazy to say that. But there were some authors that compared Greco to Bourgogne. The soil changed dramatically, even within each vineyard. And the problem is that we have not been able as a community of producers, and that's where I say we need to find our own way. This is more complicated than Etna, but can be more effective. We need to talk about subzones of Greco. And in white wines, if you exclude Bourgogne, there are very few areas that talk about subzones in white wines. And I think in Greco, although it's very limited, we have a space there because also it helps the consumer, like you said, to expect it's going to be a more rounded, a simpler Greco that is maybe less interesting, or it's going to be an incredible, outstanding white wine that you don't compare with anything. And we need to talk about that. We need to start saying we are starting our single vineyard project where we have a vineyard out of each of the towns because we have vineyards everywhere. Mm-hmm. Now we are making 5 different Grecos, small production, not for big sales, but for tasting. And we are starting, this is a project called Feudi Studi. And it's a project where we really start doing this. And we hope that the producers that work only on 1 town or 2 towns, they can help us in talking about the town within the Greco area.
Right.
Because I think it's of course, I was very simplistic about the towns. It's not just the towns, it's also the cultivation method, because in Greco in general, you like the ancient pergola works better. But in general, if you are in that towns, the quality will be higher, and the soils are more interesting. It's all about the soils. If you plant Greco in Puglia or in other areas, because we did, Greco is a relatively neutral grape, surprisingly.
But that's not surprising to me because I have had bad Greco. So when you've had bad Greco, it does not taste good. Again, that is, I'm glad to hear that you're making this effort. I do also think that you're spot on because people are starting to really want to know more about the subzones of places in general. And it doesn't matter whether it's red or white wines, but I think the idea that you could put that on a bottle, even if you're not going to go through the whole DOCG process with them, but just even to be able to put that on a bottle is so important.
We're working on that.
Yeah.
We're working also on the DOCG idea, to be honest, with subzone.
Isn't the Italian government just a nightmare and the EU to work with on that?
Probably 50 years. But let's hope to start now. It's going to take 50 years. But the good thing is that we are starting a process because, first of all, it's not just the government, the European Union, all the thing. Is that the producers themselves, they're not all convinced that it's good. But all the examples of appellation, they have been successful because they simplified. And I think now is not the time. We have not been successful like that. We are a narrow appellation. We are an appellation for connoisseurs. So let's make it complicated like it is. Let's make it more than complicated. Let's make it sophisticated to reflect the complexity of the terroir. So for me, we need, first of all, to convince ourselves that we can convey a more sophisticated message to the consumer. And I mean, I'm happy I'm here with you because we can talk about that. But I think that in general, people are curious and they want to go beyond just now the little story that Greco was brought by the Greek and blah, blah, blah. No? I think we can start talking about the subzones. And I think people, if they have the glass in front of them, they understand, they are curious. And so that's where we need to go. In particular for Greco, Fiano, of course, there is Lapio area and there is Sorbo Serpico area. There are areas that there's Sumonte area. Even in Fiano, there are areas that are quite different. But I think it's more consistent.
Yes, it definitely is. One thing that I have found, and this is one thing that, again, I'm excited to hear that you're doing this, is that let's say that I go out and I have a Feudi Fiano or I have a Greco, or I have an Aglianico.
Yeah.
That's all that there is. I can't go deeper. So with Bordeaux or Bourgogne or Barolo, you can go into those sub-appellations. Campania can do that, and I think it should do that because if I am somebody who really likes the basic wine, I've got nowhere to go. You know what I'm saying? Right now.
I mean, we started in 2012, going well beyond. On Aglianico, we started with Cru like 20 years ago. So there is something to go beyond. Now, the problem is that we need to convince our importers. So help me with that. In the US,
I'm happy
this
to.
wine. Because, but to be honest, the question is not, I understand the market is limited because we are not able to convey that message as an area. And I think we need to do it. We need to continue doing it because I think that the real, and even when big publications speak about the area, they don't really diversify.
No, and it's so simple. They'll talk about Taurasi and then they leave it there. I think the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because I have seen more of it, and I know for a long time it was sort of more of a novelty, but now quality is improving. And you make one, the Lacryma Christi, which has a great story, if you can tell it, because there's a lot of different origins of the name. But do you think maybe that could open another door for Campania that then people would move into other grapes? Or what? Talk about Lacryma Christi, because it's an excellent story.
That's McKinsey, I'm sorry. Just to be systematic, there is a third appellation after Fiano and Greco, which is Taurasi, the DOCG, and then we will speak about that.
Well, I want to talk about the red. Yeah, I want to talk about that separately when we start talking about the grapes, because that's really all Aglianico, and I want to do a little section of talking about Aglianico. Okay. But let's
move to Vesuvio. Vesuvio is close to Naples.
And it's far from you, right?
It's like 40 kilometers, so it's not that far. So basically, in Vesuvio, there are two appellations. One is Lacryma White, Lacryma Christi White. The other one is Lacryma Christi Red. In Lacryma Christi White, you use Coda di Volpe, which is a grape meaning foxtail. It's a grape very productive. So not as interesting, to be honest, as expressive as the ones we mentioned. You use this foxtail grape because the shape of the grape is similar to the tail of a fox. And then Falanghina, 80% Coda di Volpe and 20% Falanghina. And the difference, the real thing is not really the varietals characteristic, but the soil, of course, that is volcanic. So that's what stands out in the Lacryma Christi White. In the red, which you were mentioning, you have 80% Piedioso, 20% Aglianico. Sciascinoso, you can use it up to 5 to 10%. So it's minor. You can use it. There is some small producers that just do Sciascinoso.
It's hard to say.
It's difficult for me. But it's interesting because on Vesuvio, you have like Piedioso and Sciascinoso. They are less intense in color, a little bit lighter, like a Pinot Noir, of course.
Right.
All differences being made. So it's interesting what is happening also on this varietal Sciascinoso. It shows also that Campania is not only about the power. It's about the elegance in Taurasi, but it can also be a wine that is a little bit lighter and elegant as well, like Sciascinoso, like Piedioso. It's interesting.
we're going to take a step away from the podcast and tell you about our sponsor this week. But before I talk about wine access, I do want to tell you that if you have not tried the wines from Campania yet, you need to run, not walk, to go get them. They really are so remarkable. So few people know about them, which is one of the challenges that we really are talking about in this show. Antonio is really being frank about it. But Feudi and all of the other wines of Campania are unbelievable. I have yet to find somebody who have turned on to these wines who isn't finding at least one of them to be divine. So get on it. They will totally be in your rotation. And hopefully you might be able to find some at Wine Access, and go to wineaccess.com/normal so that you can check out the website, sign up for their email list, and see if they have something that you want so that you can get $20 off your first purchase of $50 or more. That is an incredible savings. Wine Access is a website that has wines you will not really find anywhere else. They have competitive prices and the selection is meticulous. Their team of experts picks amazing wines and they do a great job of finding things that are hard to get elsewhere. Once you start looking at the site, you will find that there is a breadth and a depth that you did not know was there. Lots of comments from other listeners. They've said, I finally looked at wineaccess.com/normal. I was able to find so many interesting wines I did not expect to be there. And in addition, I went to sort of try out the $20 bottles and wound up buying a bunch for $40 because they were really good and I hadn't seen them anywhere else. So temperature controlled shipping, excellent storage conditions. I really would like it if you at least gave them a try. If you're going to buy wine online, give wineaccess.com/normal a try. Do it today. Also, just a quick reminder, if you have not signed up for Patreon, patreon.com/normal. That is how you can support the podcast on an ongoing basis. It keeps us going. We can't do it without you. So many of you have come out and supported us. Thank you so much. We will do personal shout outs next week, but I just wanted to thank everybody. Don't forget to pick up the Wine for Normal People book on any bookseller if you haven't done that, and check out the Wine for Normal People classes on winefornormalpeople.com/classes. And now let's get back to the show. Here in the States, I've been seeing a lot of varietal Pido Rosso, which I had never seen before. Now, there are some people who really like Coda di Volpe also, but Pido Rosso I have seen on labels. People are carrying it, which is surprising to me because it's good. It's kind of simple.
To be honest, I'm not a big fan. I shouldn't say, but I'm not a big fan on Coda di Volpe when impurity, and I'm not a big fan on Piedi Rosso impurity, if not maybe on the Vesuvio slopes, because and I think that's the problem. That's also the problem why our region is not as disciplined as it should be to make communication strong, because everybody produces everything, and there is a reason why some varietals became over time less known, became wines that you blend but you don't produce impurity. There is always a reason, and the farmer is always right. So when we say that in Italy there are like in Campania there are like 500 indigenous varietals that disappeared, I always say that's a reason for that.
I always say that too. I'm so glad that you said that, because when sometimes people are like, well, we're reviving this old grape, and then I taste it and I'm like, it should not be standing by itself.
There are exceptions, but I agree with you.
But it's sort of like, I don't want to get into the whole big thing about natural wine. There are some very good ones. However, for most of human history, people have been trying to get the wines to the point that we have them at now. And so for us to take a step back and get them not clear and get them with bacterial spoilage and all that, we have been working our butts off as people in this industry for so long, for centuries, to try to get the wines to be as good as they are right now. And now we want to go back. I don't get that either.
And these varietals, they disappeared when wine was all natural, by the way. So in reality, it disappeared for some reasons because the farmers didn't think it was appropriate. The varietals, I believe that the varietals, there is a I don't want to say that we need to follow the tradition now, because Feudi is all about vision and being innovative. But I think there is a reason, in particular in areas that have such a strong viticultural foothold, there is a reason why things happened. And I think why you don't do video, why my grandfather who didn't, my grandfather was not making wine, but why the person the age of my grandfather that used to make wine would say, Piedi Rosso is not good for making wine. And why I have to prove the contrary, the opposite when I have Aglianico, when I have the possibility to blend, when I have so many things to do. So for me, Piedi Rosso, I'm not particularly excited. There are good examples, but because good producers are everywhere, and good producers, they know how to put also their own style. Now we get into a difficult point. Now, how much it's the producer wine, how much the terroir wine.
Right.
The good thing about my area is that we can really produce terroir wine, and really our approach is let's put it as little as needed to try to get the fruit stand out and the quality of the grape stand out. When you work with Piedi Rosso, you need to do stuff. And if you
well, yes, I am very interested in having this conversation with you because Feudi is often touted as being the big modern producer, maybe less terroir, more about modern winemaking, but that is not how you're talking. So is it just relative to the rest of what everybody's doing there? I'm not sure why is that a misnomer? I'm not sure why people say that about you. First of all, I would say that I have never seemed to notice in your wines that they certainly have their own style, but it's not that they're so very different from everybody else's in the sense that they don't reflect terroir. In other words, I'm sure that you've had wines from the United States before, and people like to tinker here, right? We are big tinkerers. We really like to make wine instead of having wine sometimes show itself. You always know when the winemakers had a heavy hand. I don't find that with your wines, but yet, as I was doing research on you, that's the one point that people always pounce on. And I'm wondering what you think about that.
First of all, it's good to look at the future rather than only look at the past. Now, so I'm happy that people say we are a contemporary, modern winery, modern thinking winery. And it's also true that we played this game in terms of communication. So like you have labels that are quite stand out, even if they have historical mosaics on it. The Feudi di San Gregorio, it's an historical name talking about Gregory the Pope that used to make wine in this area in the 7th century. So there is a lot of history respect in what we do. But it's true that we played outsider, the breaking the balance game when we came in. And I think it was positive for also many producers that came afterwards. But this is not conflicting at all with being totally respectful of our tradition. We are, and I look at my kid who is 6 and I'm thinking when I'm going to go to leave the winery to him and I can finally rest. And I'm afraid it's going to take some time. No? But when I look at him, I always think that this winery, which we work for them. So the approach is that we look at the future, we are contemporary. We like in particular that our idea of making wine is not, it's the people have to enjoy it and drink the second glass, and it's important. That's a prerequisite. So if this is modernity, then I'm in. But at the same time, in the vineyards care, we have been one of the most respectful wineries in the area. And we are, like today, we have 350 hectares that we manage, divided into 750 parcels.
Do you own it or how does that work?
No, we own 350 hectares divided in 700 parcels, which means that we totally followed and supported the area and the micro area that here you don't have big estates. Every farmer used to grow vegetables, vine and olive trees, etc. And we didn't change that. We bought these estates. We kept them separate, even if it's not particularly economical, because it helped us to have such a variety of possibilities. And then we have like 600 farmers, each one of them growing 1 hectare in approximately. We have 10-year contracts with them that it's basically like a rent because we don't want them to be scared of the harvest. And then I'm going back to that. And so we have another 600 variables. And I think the relationship with farmers, I think if you talk with farmers, you understand that Feudi is seen not really as a winery forgetting about the terroir, on the contrary. So we have pruning schools, we have a systematic relationship with our farmers, we keep them safe, in particular even this year, we keep them safe for anything that happens on the market because we want them to harvest at the right time. And it's challenging in this area. And now I'm skipping to another topic, but it's challenging because we harvest very late, between October and November.
Yep.
And so it rains, it can get very cold in the night.
It's a little scary when you have to be worrying about that weather starting to come, because it was a long time ago. I was in college, and I remember going to Rome in early October, and it was really hot, and going again a month later and it being absolutely freezing. That swing is just, it sticks in my mind whenever I think about southern Italy, that temperature over the course of a month could change that much. It makes sense, but it's scary if you're harvesting late. You've got to wait for ripeness, especially on the Aglianico, right?
Yes, that's why we want our farmers to be safe. We want them to harvest at the right time. Otherwise, they will tend, if they're paid by the kilo, they will tend to harvest a little bit earlier to avoid any, big rain to ruin their harvest. No? So the approach that we've been following has been very, very respectful. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that myself, but it is true. And so the modernity of the approach of the communication, and even at some point the contemporaneity of the style of wines going towards drinkability, it's not really conflicting with being totally respectful of the terroir. Consider that we are one of the few large wineries in Italy where there is not a winemaker that is the head of production. We have an agronomist who is the head of production, which I think makes it all difference, because we believe that really in this area, harvesting at the right time, having so many different parcels is critical. So the winemaker comes afterwards. The agronomist comes first. We have been the ones doing enormous work about indigenous clones because they survived over time. That's the difference. We are not doing archaeological studies. We are doing real studies. The clones are there. So why we should buy one clone that is the Mastro Berardino classic clone and use it everywhere? This would allow us to have a little bit less diversity. We could be more affected by sickness. Why don't we reproduce the potential of this terroir? So I think there are a number of things we registered, like these 30 clones to the Ministry of Agriculture. I think the only thing that can make a difference is not how beautiful my label is and how well distributed our wines are. I think the thing that makes a difference is really that we have this viticultural story. If we don't tell that story, and of course the wines are good. Of course they're very good. They have different complexity levels, etc. But I think the thing that stands out is that you are in an area where you still have farmers, you still have small estates, you have no intense viticulture. You don't even need to talk about biological because it's by nature in balance. We are beyond the idea of bio because it's an area where really the farmer has such a small property and they do everything all together. You have cherry trees in the middle of this old vineyard where Serpico is made that is incredibly balanced, and you know that is all good. So I think that's what we need to talk about, and that's why hospitality is so important. That's why we are eager to bring people to travel and see our terroir, because if they see it, they remember. If I tell about it, it's difficult to convince because everybody loves, of course, his own terroir. No? So that's what we also need to do. The second thing we need to do, we need to be sophisticated as our terroir is, and we need to convey the potential and the diversity of our terroir. And the second thing is we have to bring people. So first of all, I turn to you. You have to come to visit us whenever it's possible.
I'm there. So you're talking about this, and what occurs to me is some regions are very competitive and some are super collaborative. So it sounds to me like that there are a lot of small growers. I mean, again, stateside, we see, and I don't know how it is if you're listening to this in the UK or Canada or Australia, you'll have to let me know what you see. But we see Feudi, we see Mastro Berardino, and we see Terradora. That's pretty much it. Occasionally we see other small growers, but it sounds to me like you know some of these people. I mean, you're saying you're big, but they're not big like some of the very large wineries in Tuscany, for instance. You're big for your region.
No, we are large for our region.
Yes.
I think we are getting towards collaborative.
Okay, so you're not quite there.
No, but almost no one in Italy is so collaborative. Sicily is a good example of collaboration because they talk about the DOC very well together. But the real masters of collaboration are French. They hate each other, but they never speak bad of each other. And Italians, in particular, appellations that are not as well known, like ours, getting collaborative is not easy. We're not there. We like each other, but we're not collaborative. So it's a different thing.
What is that about? What do you think that's about? It's just everybody's in their own thing, or are they afraid to share?
When you have you don't have many mid-sized wineries. The smaller are very small. They don't want to share the few commercial contacts they have. They really fight for getting all their production out. And they believe, in particular, I believe it's their fault now. They're all friends, and I believe that it's also their merit if this area can grow in the future because they bring so many diverse expressions. But it's their fault now if they're a little bit narrow-minded, because the larger producers are more open now, and I think some of them, rather than sharing, they are more scared of losing something. And we don't understand. It's not because I'm particularly smart. It's a very simple story.
You are.
No, our size is like the size of a ball, no? But then if our size becomes 10 times bigger and Feudi gets 50%, then definitely, even if Feudi gets 45% of a larger size or a larger pie, we are better. The problem is that with people where they struggle with really getting the wines they produce out in the market and they have 1% of a pie, they really don't want to put this in perspective. So I think we need to work on that. And I think we like each other. That's a good thing. We don't hate each other. So it's collaborative. For instance, in the vineyards, it's super collaborative. We have these pruning classes and many other producers come in. We share practices. We share knowledge. So that's incredible because in other areas, they don't do that. France, they are collaborative in commerce, but they're not collaborative, for instance, in production. We do tasting together very often and we compare, we talk. So I think the only step we miss is to become collaborative in promoting the wines. And I think that's the most critical one, because once we do that, I think we have a more opportunity to be successful, to be honest.
Can't you get EU dollars to do that? That's what France does. Well, we can talk about that later.
There are EU dollars.
France takes a lot of that pie and uses it very well. All right, I want to talk about, I've left this towards the end. One other point I want to make, which I know you can't make this, is that Feudi did something very interesting and had a very great opportunity to grow, which I don't know, it's a strange thing, but Mastrobuoni and Terroir are part of the same family. And there was a schism, as is often the case in all European wineries, family-owned wineries. And things didn't go well for either one of them while they were fighting. And in the meantime, Feudi just grew and did your own thing. And I think that it was a great opportunity for you to find your feet without having to worry about other things. Is that true?
It's true. I mean, first of all, Southern Italians, they are like the Sopranos, no? So they fight each other all the time. So it's true. There have been a split in their family. Mastrobuoni, they kept the brand, but they didn't keep the vineyards. Terroir kept the vineyards, but without the brand. So they created a brand from scratch. So it was a massive crisis. But this happened when Feudi was already as big as Mastrobuoni at the time.
But you guys just sort of did your thing, and I think that is part of your success, that you stayed so focused, and and did a great job on the marketing. Where are those mosaics on your label from Ravenna?
Yeah, they're from Ravenna because San Gregorio was, as I said, was a pope that used to make wine. I mean, in every Italian region, there is an area that they can say that the Pope was making wine out of there. So it's not particularly unique. But it's true that we have signs and and written books that says that actually the Pope Gregory the Great was making wine in the area where the winery is located today. And at the time, the most famous art was actually Byzantine artwork that was depicted in mosaics that are now mostly present in Ravenna. So the idea behind these labels was to represent convivial scenes from the most famous art at the time of Gregory the Great, the Pope. You said a very, very good thing before. We did our own way. And I think if there is something I can say about the Mastrobuoni Terroir story, is that they were more talking about who is going to be the monopolist, and they really didn't see the future of the opportunity of the area. So that's true. We always thought, and we think today, we always think about what is to come. Yep. So the possibility of the future for the area. When they were fighting, probably they were more thinking about what they were losing rather than what they could capture.
Well, there's a lot of articles on it that people can read. It seemed to get kind of ugly. It's a story I like to tell. If you're taking the Southern Italian class, I always tell the story because it's very typical. I mean, it happens in Burgundy all the time too. That's why you have so many people with the same last name, because they do this all the time.
Right, but there is a sentence written when you get in the winery in Feudi. It's a sentence that says that our great designer who designed the label, his name was Massimo Vignelli, was an Italian born, but a New York based designer. Now he passed away a few years ago, but he was the one designing the Bloomingdale brown bag, for instance, or the New York Underground map,
Oh, wonderful.
the new one. He was an incredible genius, and he used to spend the holidays in the Amalfi Coast. So then when my family got to know him, and then we asked him to do the labels. So it was definitely a big opportunity because the labels stand out. And I remember when I joined the winery, I had the crazy idea. So I thought, okay, for a 30th anniversary of the winery, let's revive an old label of the winery, and so I called him and I said, Massimo, we need to do this. It's a great idea. Let's do the old label of Taurasi. It was so beautiful. And then he literally closed the line. Closed the phone on me. And then he sent me a fax. I remember a fax. It was 2010. So everybody was using email. Even himself, he was using email. But he preferred to send me a fax. And the fax said, Antonio, the three most important things in life are vision, courage, and determination. People who don't have it, they deserve to fail. This was... And so I remember, because I like, that's what Feudi is. Feudi is a winery like I am, like my father was, open to criticism and open to make mistakes and also admit that. So I decided to take this fax, and it became a big lead at the entrance of the winery. We really think, and it's written, Antonio, the people who don't have it deserve to fail. So it's not the people who have it are going to be successful. It's the people who don't have it, they will fail, which is different.
Right.
It's a different framing. And I think that to say we did our own thing, we always thought about the future as having vision, because this is something we never lacked. And then having the determination to try to, even if we make mistakes, even if sometimes we do projects like the sparkling Metodo Classico, which is incredibly interesting, but was not that easy at the beginning on our varietals. Even if you do mistakes, even if you try new things, be determined to follow your vision. And I think this is something that is our DNA, a little bit at Feudi.
And you can't be afraid to be a little bit different, but also to stay your own path. And I think if you constantly are looking around you, you can't succeed. And that's, I think, one of the biggest mistakes people make in the wine business and in other businesses too, because you're responsible for your own, and you have to be responsible for making that the best that you can make it. If you're constantly looking over your shoulder, you'll never make it.
It's true. And we are lucky that we have such a strong viticultural story and tradition, because otherwise the risk is that you want to be different, as is kind of, you want to stand out to be always different, and you do mistakes as well.
I want to talk about Aglianico, because this is the one thing that Campania does get marks on, that people definitely are starting to know, or that do know, is the Aglianico. I think that it is especially Taurasi, because there are, and have been on an ongoing basis, articles about Taurasi being essentially the Barolo of the South. And although they're such different wines, I'm not sure why they call it that, but I guess it's just for the status. And the fact that Aglianico takes on so many different, depending on where it's grown and how it's handled, takes on so many different faces, and you have a bunch of them. I would love for you to speak about this unbelievable grape, especially for people that have never had it, and why it is so expressive and so different depending. Now, did I also read that do you have a site in Basilicata also now?
Correct, a big site in Basilicata.
There's not enough Vulture out there, so I'm glad you did that.
Yeah, it's another winery separated called Basilisco. It's a winery that was established in 1995 that we purchased in 2010. It's in the Vulture area. So basically, Aglianico, to answer your question, if I like to say there are many, as we said, indigenous red varietals in Italy, but the backbone of Italian red varietals is Nebbiolo in the north, Sangiovese in the center, Aglianico in the south. And in the south, you find Aglianico in Campania, you find Aglianico in Basilicata, in Vulture you find Aglianico in Puglia. But the two most interesting areas are, one is Taurasi, where Aglianico is a DOCG appellation, and Taurasi is the name of a town at 400 meters in the Avellino province. And then you have Vulture, which is another DOCG appellation, more recent, where we are in Basilicata, and we are on the slope of a volcano called Vulture. And the two Aglianicos, they have the same, basically it's the same DNA, it's the same grape, but very different results. We talk about Taurasi first, and then if we are interested, we can also talk about Basilicata. But definitely these two are very interesting, both of them. Taurasi is a town at 400 meters. This is the historic area of producing Aglianico. It goes up to 800, 900 meters, up to Castelfranci and Paternopoli, which are towns where now the most expressive producers, more interesting producers are moving their production, so up on the hills. And so it's also this appellation can produce a diversified set of wines depending on where you are. Aglianico is a varietal brought in the south of Italy by the Greek. Hellenike was the Greek name of Greece. So it has a big history. And in our area, it was grown since ever. And definitely it was the varietal I was talking about that was brought up north in the railway. So at the beginning of the 20th century, there was Aglianico almost everywhere. The good thing about Aglianico is that there are two things that are interesting to mention. The first one is the harvest. Harvest is in November. The harvest in November, when we start harvesting Aglianico end of October, let's say beginning of November, in Tuscany, they're already on holiday. And we always, with our friends, producers in Tuscany, we always make fun of each other because when we start, they are done, and we start our challenge, which is really fighting with the weather. Mm-hmm. So Aglianico is charming because it's a late harvest varietal. It grows up on the hills, so it's also late harvest because of the climate and the conditions. And it grows mostly on volcanic soils, which is also a reason why maturation is low and progressive, and it takes more time for the vine to feed the grape.
Those hillsides have big temperature diurnals, so there's acidity in the Aglianico.
One is the acidity, the second one is the minerality. That you don't taste, of course, minerality, but it's definitely an element of the wine. Mm-hmm. The acidity is one of the highest of the red varietals in Italy, and it's mostly related to these temperature gaps between day and night. For instance, now I'm talking in Celsius. Now we are during the day 35, 36, but during the night it can be 13, 12.
Oh my gosh.
Temperature gap, which continues in September, October. It's an area that is very, very, really very, very interesting from that point of view. And the second thing that is interesting, it's because of the harvest time, then we have a problem with some interpretation of Aglianico. So historically, when you read the textbook about Aglianico is a rustic varietal that needs 30 years of aging to be drinkable. Now, the problem with that is that sometimes it's just being harvested at the wrong time. So when I say that we are in a moment that is particularly exciting for the viticulture area, is that we're fixing the basics in some cases. Uh-huh. So Aglianico, for a long time, because of the rain, because of the fear of the weather, of losing harvest, was harvested a little bit too early. And at the same time, because of the low yield that in general in Aglianico we have, sometimes you didn't really separate the good with the bad tannins. So the wooden part of the grape, you didn't take it out.
Oh, so they didn't destem it.
Correct. Yeah, it was part of the ancestral way of doing it.
Well, they didn't have the technology we have now, so you do what you could.
Of course, we started this stemming long time ago, but harvesting at the right time is much more challenging when you have such a fragmented area than one could think, because they say, okay, you do a test. Test doesn't help. You can have a perfect maturity based on the test, and then the grape is not ready. So you need to taste. So you need to taste, and you need to taste a lot. And you need to taste in each small parcel, sometimes each line separate. We harvest, there is one vineyard that is called Vineyard of the King, Vigneto del Re, where we make Serpico. We harvest in 5-6 different moments, the different sub-parcels, and it's a 2 hectares vineyard.
Oh my gosh, you have to keep going through it.
Yeah, because the maturity, depending on it, because it's such a long process,
yeah.
Definitely it can change even 10 days from one area to another in the same vineyard. So the real thing about Aglianico, the fruit is super sweet. If you taste Aglianico at harvest time in the right moment, it's super sweet, super fruity. So it's the contrary. When it's rustic, when it's aggressive, it means that there are probably bad tannins in it, and it's not going to be fixed by time. So it's true that Aglianico has incredible longevity because of its freshness, because of its structure, but at the same time, it's definitely a varietal that you can drink quite young if it's well done. So I believe that, for instance, our Rubrato, which is a young interpretation.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, right? Yeah, so is that's not Taurasi, that's Irpina, right?
No, because Taurasi, to become Taurasi, Aglianico not only has to be grown on the Taurasi area, the appellation area, but it has to undergo at least 18 months of oak aging. And then Taurasi Reserva is 24. What we do is that we do also a young Aglianico from the DOC, from the larger area around Taurasi, and we do only stainless steel aging for 12 months, 8 months, 10 months, and then a few months of bottle. And we see in that wine for us, of course, we put the younger vines, But it's also a wine that for me is very educational because it shows exactly what I was saying, that the drinkability of Aglianico is very high, even in young wines.
That is a delicious wine. Although even though it's young, you still do manage to get some of the spice. The one thing that I get out of Taurasi is that black pepper spice.
Yeah.
Is so
It's
lovely in the grape. But Rubrato has that also.
Yeah, because it doesn't come from the oak.
Right.
Actually, there is the spicy component of Aglianico, these dark berries and this also almost fumé flavor.
Mm-hmm.
Even the balsamic notes, they often come from oak aging in other varietals. In Aglianico, is definitely a typical element of the terroir, similar to this hazelnut aftertaste on Fiano. You would expect it goes through Slavonian oak or something. No, it's just the varietal itself. So, of course, oak aging is important. Of course, we are increasingly luckily using large oak because you don't need to do much. You need just to keep the wine a little bit longer, make it more balanced to make it last longer. But Aglianico grape has all its potential in the grape itself to be an outstanding wine. And what is nice is that sometimes you find, even from other producers, of course, I'm not talking about just Rubrato, you can taste some Mastroberardino young Aglianicos or Caggiano young Aglianicos. They're not Taurasi. They're not meant to age. And yet, 15 years after the harvest, they are incredible wines because the varietal has the potential. Similarly to what you can find on our whites. We don't make whites with the idea they have to be opened 15 years afterwards. They just do it. And it's something that Taurasi, of course, is meant to age and is done in a way that it's a wine that can really fight aging very well. And even fight is not a nice word, but can work with time.
No, it developed. It's an insanely good wine. It's one of the best wines of Italy, for sure.
For me, Taurasi, the problem, to be very, very honest, it's a bit similar with Greco. We still don't have homogeneity of quality in Taurasi, which is also a problem in making the appellation more known. So Taurasi are overall very good, but we still have to work on making the average quality better. Because I believe that it's not a cheap wine. I believe a consumer can be curious and try, but if they don't understand, if the wine is a little bit too aggressive, if the wine has some defaults, and sometimes you still find this on some Taurasis, then the consumer doesn't try a second time. So I believe we have a quality still to be improved on that. And that's a good thing about it, because I think that when you say, we're done, we just need to talk about communication, then it's a pity, because I really think that our life has to be oriented to improve ourselves. And if you think about it's true that Aglianico has been there forever and viticulture has been there forever, etc., etc. But it's also true that producers starting making Aglianico in quantity, let's say several producers exchanging views only in the 90s. Then we have the California fever, all with barriques. Honestly, we have like 10 harvests. 10, 15 harvests when we really study Aglianico quality. And then in 15 harvests, you can have 3 or 4 bad vintages, which are very good for studies, but the quality is not the same as in good vintages. So we're really an area that still has an enormous potential. And I think we shouldn't be ashamed of saying that we can improve quality. Nobody talks about it, but I think we can do.
I wouldn't want anybody to listen to this and think you shouldn't try these wines. I will tell you that it's a rare time, and especially if you go with Feudi, that you need to try these wines. If you have not tried these wines, it's really something that you have to try. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, gosh, I don't even know, I haven't even noticed this before, I haven't seen this. You can go back. I did a whole podcast on Campania about the dorkiness, like the whole region and laying it out and what it would be like, and Sogno and all of the other areas, the history. But I think the main point is, because Antonio is so passionate about making these wines perfect, that the conversation we're having is very micro, because the fact of the matter is most of the stuff that's hitting the shores of any of the people that are listening to this, 95% of it is great. Occasionally, sometimes it's a vintage issue, and sometimes it's a small producer that maybe is not as good. But I think that if you just concentrate on trying these wines, it opens a door that you didn't know was there. And that's what I love about introducing people to your wines, is that Campania is this treasure. And the other thing about the visit is that it is so close. If you didn't know it was there, now you know. So it's so close to the Amalfi Coast. You could take a day and go to Avellino and see what's going on there. If you're in the Amalfi Coast, if you're going to Pompeii, even if you're in Rome, it's not that far, right?
I agree. I mean, of course, I like to think that we have a opportunity to improve, but you're right. I mean, the
quality is already there.
Yeah, you already can understand. I mean, I think we can. The good thing is that we still have ground to improve ourselves, but the quality is there. And then definitely what is true that the terroir stands out, and the terroir is unique, and that's definitely what is charming about the wines from our area.
And the history, the legacy, all of the things that have gone on in this region, you don't see that all over the world. You don't see the kinds of reviving of this very ancient thing. I mean, when you taste Fiano, you're tasting stuff that Pliny the Elder tasted,
Yeah.
All right. Well, Antonio, I thank you so much for coming on the show. This was so fascinating. I can't wait to come and see you. I know a lot of people, when things get back to normal, will come see you also. There's zero excuse if you're going to Italy, and especially to southern Italy, not to check this area out. It is so unique and just a place of such great history and such great quality. So, Antonio, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for your time.
Elizabeth, thank you. And I look forward to welcome you at the winery, make a tour together. We have a restaurant also for our friends. So it's going to be a good experience once it's going to be possible.
And with that, this has been another episode of Wine for Normal People. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.